camp doctor stands in the medical barracks doorway and stares at something he does not understand. 34 German prisoners of war are sitting upright, eating breakfast, talking quietly among themselves. 3 weeks ago, every single one of them was marked for amputation or death from infected wounds that would not heal. The doctor had written their names on a list and prepared the paperwork for the morgue, but now they are alive and the infections are gone. The only thing that changed was an 18-year-old prisoner who refused to follow orders and invented a bandage system the doctor had never seen in any medical textbook. We are in a United States prisoner of war camp in rural Texas in the summer of 1944. The camp holds over 2,000 German prisoners captured in North Africa and Italy. Most of them are healthy, working in camp kitchens and road crews under guard. But in the medical barracks, there is a crisis that is growing every single day. Infected wounds are spreading faster than the camp medical staff can treat them. The infections come from small cuts, blisters from forced marches, shrapnel fragments that were never fully removed, and minor injuries that turned septic during transport across the Atlantic Ocean. The camp has antibiotics, but the supply is rationed for American soldiers first, and the remaining stock is running dangerously low. The chief medical officer is a United States Army captain named Dr. Raymond Hall. He trained in field surgery during the First World War and has seen infection kill more men than bullets. He knows that in hot weather, bacteria multiply in open wounds within hours. And once the infection reaches the bloodstream, the prisoner dies or loses the limb. Dr. Hall has 34 German prisoners in his barracks. Right now, with wounds that are not responding to treatment, the bandages are changed twice a day. The wounds are cleaned with iodine, but every morning the infections look worse. Red streaks crawl up arms and legs. Fever spikes every night. The smell of rotting tissue fills the barracks. Even with the windows open, Dr. Hall writes a report to the camp commander and requests emergency authorization to amputate 12 limbs and prepare isolation beds for the others. The commander approves the request but tells him to wait 1 more week. The reasoning is cold and bureaucratic. Amputations require anesthesia, surgical staff, and post-operative care. The camp does not have enough resources to handle 12 amputations at once. And the United States War Department does not want to explain why so many German prisoners are losing limbs in American custody. So, the prisoners wait, the infections spread, and Dr. Halls begins to prepare the death certificates. But he does not know that one of the prisoners has a plan that will change everything. His name is Klaus Reinhardt, and he is 18 years old. He was conscripted into the Wehrmacht in early 1943, sent to North Africa with no training, and captured by American forces during the collapse of the Afrika Korps. He spent 3 months in a transit camp in Algeria, then boarded a cargo ship to the United States with 800 other prisoners. During the Atlantic crossing, Klaus spent most of his time in the ship's medical hold because he spoke enough English to translate between the German wounded and the American medics. He did not have formal medical training, but he watched everything the medics did. He saw how they cleaned wounds, how they applied sulfa powder, how they wrapped bandages tight enough to stop bleeding but loose enough to allow drainage. He also saw what happened when the medics ran out of supplies and had to improvise. One technique stayed in his mind. An American medic ran out of sterile gauze. During a storm when the ship was rocking so hard that the medical supplies slid off the shelves and into the flooded hold, the medic tore up clean cotton undershirts, soaked them in boiled salt water, and used them as compressed bandages. The key was that he did not wrap the wounds tight. Instead, he layered the damp cloth loosely so air could circulate, but bacteria could not enter. Klaus watched 3 soldiers recover from infected leg wounds using this method when standard bandages had failed. He did not understand why it worked, but he remembered every step. Now Klaus is in the Texas camp, assigned to the medical barracks as a translator and orderly. He empties bedpans, sweeps floors, and helps German prisoners fill out medical request forms. He is not allowed to treat patients, but he watches Dr. Hawley's work every single day. He sees the doctor change bandages, apply iodine, and shake his head when the infections get worse. Klaus knows the standard method is failing. But he does not have the authority or the language skills to explain what he saw on the ship. He is just a prisoner, and prisoners do not give medical advice to United States Army doctors. But then one night a prisoner named Wilhelm Schfer starts screaming. Wilhelm Schfer is a 23-year-old infantryman with a shrapnel wound in his left thigh. The wound has been infected for 6 weeks, and tonight the fever has spiked so high that he is delirious. He thrashes in his bunk, kicks off his blanket, and pulls at the bandage on his leg. The night guard calls for Dr. Halls, but the doctor is asleep in his quarters half a mile away. The guard does not want to wake him for a prisoner who is probably going to die anyway. So he tells Klaus to sit with Wilhelm and keep him quiet until morning. Klaus pulls a chair next to Wilhelm's bunk and tries to calm him down. But Wilhelm is burning up, shaking and mumbling in German about his mother. Klaus knows this is the final stage before septic shock. If the infection is not stopped in the next few hours, Wilhelm will die before sunrise. Klaus makes a decision that violates every camp rule and could get him thrown into solitary confinement, or worse. He walks to the supply closet, finds a clean cotton sheet, and tears it into long strips. He boils water on the small stove in the corner of the barracks, adds salt from the kitchen stores, and soaks the cotton strips in the hot salt water. Then he removes Wilhelm's bandage. The wound underneath is horrifying. The flesh is black and green, oozing pus, and the smell makes Klaus gag. He uses a clean cloth to wipe away the pus, then applies the damp cotton strips directly to the wound. He does not wrap it tight. He layers the strips loosely, covering the wound completely, but leaving space for air and drainage. Then he folds a dry cloth over the top to keep dust out, but he does not tie it down. He sits back and waits. By morning, Wilhelm is still alive. The fever is dropped. The wound is still infected, but the swelling has gone down, and the pus has drained into the cotton strips. Instead of spreading deeper into the tissue, Dr. Halls arrives at 6 o'clock in the morning, sees the improvised bandage, and demands to know who changed it. Klaus stands up and admits what he did. He expects to be punished, but Dr. Halls does not yell. Instead, he examines the wound, checks Wilhelm's pulse and temperature, and asks Klaus a single question. "Where did you learn this?" Klaus explains the story from the ship, the American medic, the saltwater compresses, and the loose layering technique. Dr. Halls listens, then tells Klaus to do the same thing to 3 more prisoners. If it works again, they will try it on everyone. We are now in the 2nd week of August, 1944, and Klaus has become the most important person in the medical barracks. Dr. Halls has given him permission to treat infected wounds using his improvised bandage system, but only under strict supervision. Klaus works from dawn until midnight, tearing cotton sheets, boiling water, adding salt, and applying the damp compresses to prisoner after prisoner. The technique is labor-intensive. The bandages have to be changed every 4 to 6 hours because the cotton absorbs drainage and bacteria, and if the bandages dry out completely, they stick to the wound and cause more damage. Klaus trains to other German prisoners to help him, and together they create an assembly line. One prisoner boils water and prepares the salt solution. Another tears cotton into strips and soaks them. Klaus supplies the bandages and monitors each patient. The results are undeniable. Within 72 hours, 16 prisoners show improvement. The infections stop spreading. The red streaks fade. The fever breaks. Within 1 week, 28 prisoners are out of danger. Within 2 weeks, 34 prisoners have been saved from amputation or death. Dr. Halls documents everything in his medical reports and sends the findings to the United States Army Medical Corps. He calls the technique moist heat compressed bandaging with osmotic drainage facilitation. Klaus calls it the thing we did on the ship. The camp commander is relieved because he no longer has to authorize mass amputations or explain prisoner deaths to Washington. The German prisoners call Klaus Der Wunder, which means the miracle worker. But Klaus refuses the nickname. He insists he did not invent anything. He just remembered what someone else taught him. But there is a problem. The bandage system works, but it requires constant labor, clean water, and large amounts of cotton fabric. The camp does not have an unlimited supply of sheets. The laundry staff is already overwhelmed. Dr. Halls requests additional medical supplies from the regional command. But the request is denied. The war is escalating in Europe, and every available resource is being sent to the front lines. The camp is told to make do with what they have. Klaus realizes that if the bandage system is going to continue, he needs to find a way to make it sustainable. He needs to source materials from inside the camp without relying on official supply chains. So, he does something that is technically illegal, but morally necessary. He starts a black market barter system for medical supplies. Let us know in the comments where you are watching this from. Are you in the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, or somewhere else? We would love to know who is keeping these stories alive. Klaus knows that prisoners hoard small items as currency: cigarettes, soap, extra shoelaces, buttons, needles, and thread. In a prisoner of war camp, anything that can be traded has value. Klaus approaches the camp's senior German prisoner, a former Wehrmacht sergeant named Otto Briner, and proposes a deal. Klaus will provide medical care to any prisoner who needs it, and in exchange, Otto will organize a collection of clean cotton fabric from the prisoner's personal belongings. Otto agrees immediately because he has a brother in the medical barracks with an infected hand wound. Within 2 days, Otto delivers a pile of undershirts, handkerchiefs, and pillowcases that prisoners have donated or traded. Klaus washes everything in boiling water, cuts the fabric into strips, and restores his supply of bandage material. But the system attracts attention from the camp guards. The senior guard, a staff sergeant named Eugene Parker, notices that prisoners are moving fabric and small containers of salt between barracks. He suspects contraband, searches several bunks, and finds Klaus's stash of cotton strips and salt solution jars. Sergeant Parker drags Klaus to the camp commander's office and accuses him of running a smuggling operation. The commander listens to the accusation and calls Dr. Hall to explain. Dr. Hollies tells the commander that Klaus is not smuggling contraband. He is saving lives with donated materials because the official supply chain has failed. The commander asks Dr. Halls a direct question. If we shut this down, how many prisoners will die? Dr. Hollies answers without hesitation. At least a dozen in the next month, maybe more. The commander makes a decision that protects Klaus, but puts his own career at risk. He issues a written order authorizing Klaus to collect and use donated fabric for medical purposes under Dr. Holly's supervision. The order does not go through official channels, and the commander does not report it to regional command. If an inspection finds out, the commander could be court-martialed for allowing unauthorized prisoner activity, but he signs the order anyway, and Klaus continues his work. Sergeant Parker is furious, but he follows orders and leaves Klaus alone. The other guards start calling Klaus, the kid who broke the rules and got away with it. But Klaus does not care about the nickname or the politics. He only cares about keeping the infection rate down and the death count at 0. If you are enjoying this story and want more untold accounts from World War II prisoners of war, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are bringing you stories that most history books never covered. We are now in late September 1944, and the success of Klaus's bandage system has reached beyond the Texas camp. A United States Army Medical Corps inspection team arrives to investigate. Dr. Hollies reports about the dramatic reduction in infection-related deaths. The inspection team includes 2 doctors, a nurse, and a lieutenant colonel who specializes in field sanitation. They spend 3 days in the medical barracks examining patients, reviewing records, and observing Klaus's bandage technique in action. The lead doctor, a major named Thomas Grayson, is skeptical at first. He trained at Johns Hopkins and does not believe that a teenage German prisoner with no formal education has discovered something that professional doctors missed. But after watching Klaus work for 6 hours, Major Grayson changes his mind. The key insight is not the salt water or the cotton strips. It is the loose layering technique that allows wounds to drain while staying moist. Standard military bandages in 1944 are designed to stop bleeding and protect wounds from dirt. But they are wrapped tight and changed infrequently. Tight bandages trap bacteria and pus inside the wound, creating an environment where infections thrive. Klaus's loose layering method does the opposite. It absorbs drainage, allows air circulation, and creates a moist environment that promotes healing without sealing and bacteria. Major Grayson recognizes this as a variation of an ancient technique used in pre-antibiotic medicine, but he has never seen it applied systematically in a modern military setting. He writes a combination report for Dr. Halls and includes a detailed description of Klaus's technique with a recommendation that it be tested in other camps. The inspection team interviews Klaus through a translator and asks him to explain his reasoning. Klaus struggles to answer because he does not think in medical terms. He simply describes what he saw on the ship and what seemed to work. Major Grayson asks him if he has ever heard of osmosis, antiseptic theory, or wound debridement. Klaus shakes his head. He does not know those words. Major Grayson realizes that Klaus discovered a clinically effective treatment through observation and trial and error, not through formal training. The Major tells Dr. Halls that Klaus is a natural medic, and if he were an American soldier, he would be sent to medical school after the war. But Klaus is a German prisoner, and the war is still raging. So the best the Major can do is recommend that Klaus be kept in the medical barracks and allowed to continue his work. The recognition from the Medical Corps inspection team brings Klaus respect from the camp staff, but it also creates resentment among some of the other German prisoners. A small group of hardline Wehrmacht soldiers view Klaus as a collaborator. They believe he is helping the Americans too much, and they accuse him of betraying his fellow Germans by working with the enemy. The leader of this group is a former corporal named Heinrich Vogel, who was captured in Italy and still believes Germany will win the war. Heinrich confronts Klaus in the prisoner barracks one night and tells him that he should stop taking orders from the American doctors. Klaus tries to explain that he is not helping the Americans. He is helping German prisoners who are dying from infected wounds. Heinrich does not care. He says that collaborating with the enemy is treason, and after the war, Klaus will be held accountable. The confrontation escalates when Heinrich organizes a group of prisoners to refuse medical treatment from Klaus. He tells them that accepting help from Klaus is the same as accepting help from the Americans and real. German soldiers would rather die than submit. Dr. Halls hears about the boycott and asks Klaus if he wants protection from the guards. Klaus refuses. He knows that involving the guards will make the situation worse and turn him into a permanent outsider among his fellow prisoners. Instead, Klaus decides to confront Heinrich directly. He finds him in the mess hall and speaks loud enough for everyone to hear. He tells Heinrich that he is not a collaborator. He is a prisoner who watched 34 men almost die from infections that could have been prevented. He says that if Heinrich wants to die for his pride, that is his choice. But he will not let Heinrich convince others to die for no reason. The confrontation ends when Otto Briner, the senior German prisoner, steps in and tells Heinrich to back down. Otto reminds the group that Klaus saved his brother's hand and saved dozens of others. He says that the war is over for all of them, whether they accept it or not, and survival is not collaboration. It is common sense. Heinrich leaves the mess hall, but the tension remains. Klaus knows that he has made enemies, and he will have to watch his back for the rest of his time in the camp. But the boycott collapses. The prisoners who were refusing treatment quietly return to the medical barracks, and Klaus continues his work. The incident leaves a mark on him, though. He realizes that even when you save lives, some people will hate you for how you did it. We need to step back and look at the scale of what Klaus Reinhardt achieved in those few months in the Texas camp. 34 German prisoners of war were saved from amputation or death. That is 34 men who returned home to Germany after the war with their limbs intact, who reunited with their families, who lived decades longer than they would have without Klaus's intervention. But the numbers extend beyond those 34 men. Dr. Holly's records show that after Klaus introduced the moist bandage technique, the infection mortality rate in the camp dropped from 12% to less than 2%. Over the next 6 months, an estimated 80 additional prisoners received treatment using Klaus's method, and only 3 died from infection-related complications. That is a survival rate of over 96% in a camp that had been losing 1 prisoner every week to septic wounds. The technique also saved resources. Each amputation required surgical staff, anesthesia, post-operative care, and weeks of recovery time. By preventing amputations, Klaus reduced the medical workload and freed up resources for other patients. The camp's supply of antibiotics, which had been nearly depleted, was stretched further because fewer prisoners needed emergency intervention. The cost of Klaus's bandage system was minimal. Clean cotton fabric, boiling water, and salt. No expensive drugs, no complex equipment, no specialized training. It was a low-tech solution to a high-stakes problem. And it worked because Klaus understood the principle, even if he could not explain it in medical terminology. The principle was simple. Keep the wound moist. Allow it to drain and let the body's natural healing process do the rest. The long-term impact is harder to measure, but no less significant. After the war, Major Grayson published a paper in a military medical journal, describing the moist compress bandaging technique observed in the Texas prisoner of war camp. The paper did not mention Klaus by name because prisoners were not credited in official publications. But the technique was adopted by several field hospitals in the Pacific Theater. Post-war medical research in the 1950s and 60s confirmed that moist wound healing is more effective than dry bandaging for most types of injuries. And today, it is standard practice in hospitals worldwide. Klaus did not invent moist wound care, but he rediscovered it and proved it worked in a setting where conventional methods had failed. That alone makes his story worth remembering. We are now in the spring of 1945, and the war in Europe is collapsing. Germany surrenders in May, and the prisoners in the Texas camp receive the news in stunned silence. Some cry, some refuse to believe it, others simply sit and stare at the fence. For Klaus, the end of the war brings relief and uncertainty. He has spent 2 years as a prisoner, and now he does not know what happens next. The United States government announces that German prisoners of war will be repatriated gradually over the next year. But the process is slow and bureaucratic. Klaus remains in the camp through the summer and fall of 1945, continuing to work in the medical barracks because Dr. Hall's requests that he stay until a replacement can be trained. In November 1945, Klaus is transferred to a repatriation camp in New Jersey, and from there, he boards a cargo ship back to Germany. The journey takes 3 weeks, and when he arrives in Hamburg, the city is unrecognizable. Entire neighborhoods have been bombed into rubble. Refugees crowd the train stations. Food is scarce, and the occupation authorities are struggling to maintain order. Klaus makes his way to his hometown in Bavaria and finds that his family's house is still standing. But his father was killed in an air raid in 1944, and his mother is living with relatives in the countryside. Klaus reunites with his mother, but the reunion is bittersweet. She is proud that he survived, but she does not understand what he did in the camp. She does not understand why he helped the Americans, and she does not want to talk about the war. Klaus tries to return to normal life, but there is no normal life to return to. Germany is occupied, divided, and devastated. Jobs are scarce, and former soldiers are viewed with suspicion by the occupation authorities. Klaus applies to work as a medical assistant in a hospital, but he has no official training and no credentials. The hospital turns him down. He works odd jobs for 2 years, hauling bricks, clearing rubble, and repairing roads. In 1948, he enrolls in a vocational training program for medical technicians. And by 1950, he is working in a hospital in Munich as a surgical assistant. He never becomes a doctor, but he spends the rest of his career in medicine. He marries in 1953, has 2 children, and lives a quiet life. He does not talk about the war, and he does not talk about what he did in the Texas camp. For decades, Klaus Reinhardt's story was forgotten. He did not write a memoir. He did not give interviews. He did not seek recognition or compensation. The only record of his work existed in Dr. Hall's medical reports, which were filed away in a United States Army archive and forgotten. In the 1980s, a researcher studying prisoner of war medical care stumbled across the reports and noticed the unusual references to a teenage German prisoner who developed a bandage technique that saved dozens of lives. The researcher tried to track down Klaus, but found only fragmentary records. Klaus had died in 1979, and his family had no knowledge of his time in the Texas camp. The researcher eventually located Otto Briner, the former senior German prisoner who was still alive and living in Stuttgart. Otto confirmed the story and provided additional details, but by then it was too late to interview Klaus himself. The story gained wider attention in the 1990s when a documentary filmmaker interviewed survivors of United States prisoner of war camps. Several former prisoners mentioned Klaus by name and described how he saved their lives with his bandage technique. One of them, a man named Franz Klein, still had scars from an infected wound that Klaus treated in 1944. Franz said that without Klaus, he would have lost his leg, and he credited Klaus with giving him 50 more years of life. The documentary aired on German television in 1996. Klaus's surviving family members saw it for the first time. His daughter, who was in her 40s, said she had no idea her father had done anything like that. She only knew him as a quiet man who worked in a hospital and never talked about the war. Today, Klaus Reinhardt's name is not widely known outside of a small community of historians and former prisoners of war. There is no monument to him, no hospital named after him, no medal or commendation in his file. But the 34 men he saved went home to their families. And their children and grandchildren are alive today because of what Klaus did in that Texas camp in 1944. That is the legacy. Not fame, not recognition, but lives that continued when they should have ended. Klaus did not set out to be a hero. He was an 18-year-old prisoner who remembered something he saw on a ship, took a risk that could have gotten him punished, and saved 36 men from a death sentence. That is the story, and that is why it matters.